So it's a warm welcome to everybody that's listening to the session and watching the session today. So I'm Damien Wamfor, I'm the founder of Catalyst 14, and really pleased to have Helen sitting with me today, and going to be in dialogue around her work as a coach and her experiences of developing her own coaching business as well. So firstly, I should say, before I talk to the group, Helen, I should really say, thank you for making the time today. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. And I'll introduce you in a short while, Helen, if that's okay. I mean, just really for the people that are joining us for the first time on one of these sessions live, everybody's going to be on mute for the call. You'll see the chat panel in front of you. So, please feel free to share any thoughts, any questions as you're listening to the session. I'd always recommend people to close down any additional, I suppose, applications that you may have open, because sometimes this impacts the transmission speed. And, I'd also suggest having a pen and paper handy, because I'm sure there's going to be lots of wisdom that Helen's going to be sharing with us today about her experiences. So, yeah, and we'll try and make this interactive. So I will pause from time to time just to see if there's any questions that are emerging for anybody. So let me introduce Helen. So I've known Helen for the last 4 or 5 years actually, and Helen, her coaching career started as an internal coach over 5 years ago with KPMG. And since that time, she actually left KPMG and has set up her own coaching business. So Helen now works predominantly with female senior leaders and also high potential leaders in large corporations, and does a lot of work specifically in professional services as well. And I was really sort of keen to get this session with Helen. So personally, I've been really impressed with her proposition and how she's developed her coaching business. And I thought it'd be really interesting for people to hear, and so to talk about you like her, but I thought it'd be really interesting for people to hear Helen's experiences, both in terms of the work that she does, but also her experiences of moving from that internal role to an external role, and also developing her own business as well. So that's the intention for up to the next hour, really. Helen and I will be having a dialogue, and we really want to make this obviously impactful for you. And I appreciate, I have had some questions sent through to me already, and I've got some questions in mind that I'd really like to ask Helen. But now is really just a chance for us to pause before I turn to Helen and ask the first question and get into a dialogue, but just a chance to see what you personally would like to get from the session. So if there are any questions that you're holding that you would really like to ask somebody that has been in transition, developing their own coaching business, but also working specifically in the field that Helen works in, what questions come to mind for you? So please just take a couple of moments and just enter these in the chat panel in front of you, and then Helen and I can sort of see these coming through, just to make sure that the conversation that I'm facilitating with Helen, I'm actually picking up some of your questions as well. So yeah, what questions would you like to ask Helen today? So I'm just going to pause and see what comes up in the chat panel. Okay, so Helen, I'm just going to start actually, and we'll see what questions emerge as we're coming through. So, I mean, obviously, I've sort of seen some of your progress and your development over this period, but I suppose reflecting on the journey that you've made as a coach. I mean, maybe let's start with that. What would have been some of your key insights from your experience that you'd like to share?
Yes, and there have been many, many. And if I just choose a couple of insights in terms of my practice as a coach and how that has developed. I think when I started out and trained as a coach, I was very pure in my approach, and that's how I was trained. So this idea of being not directive as a coach, with the women that I work with, not bringing more data into the room, not offering opinion, not suggesting things that I may have heard or seen or had an experience with other clients. For a while, I was very pure about that. And then I think I got into some bad habits, and the pendulum swung to being more directive, because that's my background. Before I was a coach, I was a consultant for many years in KPMG doing transactions, and it was drummed into me that I had to know the answer. So I got into some bad habits, but now I think in the work that I'm doing, I'm in this great place of allowing the pendulum to swing from being non-directive to directive, and really playing with that. And that's been a huge change for me as a coach, feeling comfortable to work on both ends of the spectrum and somewhere in between as well. So that's been one thing. The other thing is about being brave, and particularly the areas in which I work. So I work a lot in elite professional service firms. I work a lot in law firms. And I think what held me back and what I've had to learn over the time is more creative ways of coaching, which I know are hugely impactful. So working with imagery, doing more embodied systemic work, those sort of techniques, I, for a very long time, found difficult to bring into the room of a law firm. There was something about the environment, the context, that made me think, oh my God, are they really going to want to do this? And I've learned, and I'm still learning, but I've learned a lot around how to bring those techniques in a way that feels safe and experimental with my clients, so that they'll give it a go. So there's something about, in my mind, switching off the assumption that because I'm stepping into a particular organization, I have to be a particular type of coach. The other insight I guess I'd share at this stage is that I'm really conscious of recognizing when I'm doing too much of the work. So I like to think, or I know when I'm a good coach, I'm walking alongside my client and we're heading towards a goal. When I see myself 2 steps ahead, sort of taking them by the hand, I know I'm doing too much. And the risk is we end up somewhere they didn't want to go. And so being able to be conscious of myself in the moment, that is what is happening, has been a huge insight for me as a coach. And I suppose there's just some things about my practice, and I'm happy to talk more about insights of making this into a business, of course. But they're the sort of things that strike me about developing this practice I have around talented women.
And so maybe perhaps talk a bit more about the work that you're doing now, Helen, in terms of what specifically tends to be the coaching work you're focusing on now.
Yeah. So I specialize primarily in women, as we've said, and I coach women because for a very long time, forever, in fact, women have been disadvantaged in the workplace. And I want to do something that feels meaningful and purposeful to contribute to the whole gender equality agenda. And not only because I'm a woman and I have female friends, but I have a 5-year-old daughter. She will have all this to come. And so now I spend my time really working with my clients in 3 scenarios that I know and have seen makes an impact. The first is maternity coaching. So that's working with women before, during, and after they go on mat leave. And that's really helping my clients to exit the business well and set the foundations for their return. And then when they're on mat leave, it's about what boundaries do you want to set for yourself when you come back. And then when they're back, how is it in reality? If things are not as you hoped they would be in terms of your boundaries, what can we do about that? But also longer term career, where do you go from here? What now? Second area, so that first one is maternity. The second area is a really growing part of my business and a really growing phenomenon in the city, which is coaching returners. These are not all women, but 99% women who have been out of the workplace for a very long time, often 7, 8, 9, 10 years, not always to bring up a young family, but often for family reasons. And they want to come back in. And the city now recognises there's huge talent there that they want to tap into. And my work is really helping them step back into the workplace with confidence and helping them navigate all the things that come with being in a work environment. So that's the second area. The third area is probably what we'd think of as more traditional executive coaching, which is helping women through other significant transitions. So I work a lot with partners in law firms and professional service firms, helping them if they're going to take on a leadership role. I work a lot with partner candidates, helping them through the process, but also often more critically, helping them understand who they want to be as a partner. What's life going to look like as a partner? And then I work with individuals who have huge potential, and that these firms recognise these individuals are brilliant, but there's something holding them back from making that transition. And that can cover a range of behaviours and limiting beliefs often. So yeah, they're the three things really: maternity, returners, and more traditional executive coaching through transition.
And so thank you. And I think, I suppose my experience as I'm listening, real clarity around what you're offering. And I know for a lot of coaches who are trying to identify, the work they want to do, or, who they are as a coach in terms of their practice. So, what advice, Helen, just based on your experience, would you give, other coaches that, or even people that are thinking about coaching in terms of, this question that, for most of us, we've asked ourselves in terms of, what's the work that I really want to do?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, first thing to say, I think it's really hard to identify that niche. And a few things happened, not all at once, but a few things came together for me that helped me identify that niche. One of them was, I want to say luck, but it was the opportunity that came my way. At the time when I was training to become a coach, and I was a coach in KPMG, we were doing a lot of maternity coaching. That's the route I sort of went down, and that opened my eyes to what was possible there. The other thing that I did when I was setting up my business was look at this really commercially. What is going to sell? There are so many coaches out there. How am I going to stand out as a coach? What does the market want? What is new in coaching? How can coaching really apply itself to what is meaningful and purposeful for me? So there's a sort of commercial piece to it, but as I mentioned about how passionate I am that women go as far as they can go in their career, it has to feel, my niche has to feel purposeful for me. So the kind of the luck element, there's the commercial element, there was the sense of is this meaningful, and to a certain extent I had to nail my colours to the mast and say this is what I'm going to do. But I would say to anyone, when you're thinking about that, don't be restricted too much. So I don't spend all my time coaching women. 99% of my time I do, but don't be too restricted, but I think it is really important you are so clear with the buyers of coaching why they should remember you. What is it about you and your coaching that they are going to remember when they have someone in their organization, let's say, that wants coaching? Because the market is full of coaches. What are you bringing that will stand out? And I suppose to find that, it's really hard to find that niche. But to get there, I would advise people to think about your best 5 coaching experiences. And if you're not a coach already, think about the best 5 conversations you've had. What has it been about those conversations? The people, the setting, the topic. What was it that you loved? And then think about your least 5 best coaching experiences. What was it about that? What are the patterns you can see? And what does that really tell you about what's going to energize you and make you want to get up every morning and go and do coaching? But I'd also do your homework on what the market wants, because if you're trying to pay the bills with this, you've got to be paid for it. So yes, that's what I say in terms of trying to find your niche. Do you want me to talk more about generally building the business,
I
Damien?
think it'd be useful, Helen, just in terms of what other. I suppose I know I'm conscious. Obviously, this is about your business, but just your learning around developing your business. I think it'd be useful for again people that may be thinking about entry into this industry, or even people that are training or becoming coach or practicing at the moment. What are the key things you've learned that would be useful?
Yes. I think acknowledging that setting up a business, the skills needed for that are very different to the skills of a coach. There's some overlap, but there's a lot of skills that I think you need to be honest with yourself. Do I have the hunger, the appetite, the energy to make this into an actual business? I think when I started and I left my very nicely paid, comfortable, secure, lovely role in KPMG. It was a fabulous role and I loved being an internal coach. But when I knew I had to leave and there was something in me which said, I want to go off on my own, I had a bit of a fairy tale image of how life would be when I had my own business as a coach. And I'd be coaching 2 days a week. I'd be picking the kids up from school every day. I'd be baking cakes and going for lovely mindfulness walks. That isn't what has happened. And ask anyone who has a successful business, that isn't how life is. But I love it. It's not what I expected, but I love it. But I think you need to be honest in yourself about what do you want life to look like, really? And are you prepared to energize this other skill set that you hopefully have to be able to build that business? I think we've talked about being really clear on what kind of coach you are. That's essential if you're going to build a business off it. You have to be so precise as to what kind of coach you are and what you offer. And think about who is your market. I work almost only with organizations that invest in their talent. You may want to work with individuals that are self-funding. They're very different from a business perspective and a commercial perspective. One of the first things I did when I was going out on my own was to write a really good one-page coach profile with a good photo, with a clear explanation of who I was, what I brought to this, and how I coach. And that was really hard to write, actually. It took many edits to get that right, but just having that on one piece of paper that you can give to people, I think is critical from a marketing point of view. What I found really surprising when I was becoming a coach in my own right was how much people wanted to know about my life before becoming a coach. They were as interested in that as they were in my coach training and my accreditation, all that. I found that surprising, actually, but don't be caught off guard by that and use it. I think if you've trained as a coach, you'll know that in theory you can go and coach anyone. You don't have to understand their business, but the buyers of coaching often want the comfort that you know the environment. So just be mindful of that and what you can bring to assure them that you do understand the environment and you've had maybe some experience of it. I think that's really important. The other thing to say is, I've gone off on my own, and one of my fears when I set up my own business is that I would be lonely. You're spending all day one-to-one listening to other people's issues, and then you come home and you come back to your family, but effectively it could be quite a lonely existence if you come from a busy team and inside a company. And actually I've never felt lonely, but that's because I've maintained my network really well. I have a lot of people, very fortunate, I have a lot of people I can contact and meet and speak to just to sound things off with them. And that leads me to sort of training and supervision. God, when you are on your own, supervision is critical. I meet with my supervisor every month. I have peer-to-peer supervision. That's 2 hours of that every 6 weeks. I invest in training, and I can't imagine. I'll do a significant investment in training every year. I don't think that's ever going to change because I know myself and I could get into bad habits. So having that support from a training and supervision point of view is essential. But I've never felt more energized as in all my working career, because I'm doing the thing I love. I know that for sure. It is hard work. It's different to what I expected, but I now have my eyes wide open to that. And it feels purposeful, meaningful. I just want to get out of bed and do this every day because it feels right. So yeah, there's this whole commercial aspect to it, but if you don't have the sort of drive and desire to go and be a coach every day, really question whether this is for you. That's what I'd say.
Thank you, and I really appreciate you being so honest, Helen. I think Gary's asked a question around how do you go about marketing your new proposition, but I suppose in terms of what's worked for you, in terms of building your business, you've had a great deal of success over the time you've been operating. You've now got some associates working for you, so what's really enabled that for you in terms of the marketing?
Yes, I wonder if what's part of Gary's question maybe, how did you even start? How did you get this off the ground? And I'll talk a bit about how I keep it going. But the main route of work for me was always my network. So I don't pay for marketing. I don't advertise anywhere. But when I started, I simply went to the people that I worked with in other organizations, not as a coach, but I went to a lot of lawyers who I used to work with from a transactions point of view and asked them to introduce me to the heads of talent, heads of diversity. And it was that network that was fabulous. I want to say I was so grateful, and I am so grateful. But part of me thinks, gosh, they were doing me such a favor by introducing me. But actually, I knew I got on well with them. I had built such a relationship with them that they were happy to go and send me in that direction. So my network has been a huge part of that. But as the business has grown, I've become more sophisticated in how I tell the story and become more creative. So one of the something that comes in the bracket of marketing, I guess, is after my first year I wrote a little booklet saying, the title of the booklet was "We're Turning One," and I sent that out to all my network to explain about the work I'd done in that year, who we'd been coaching, what's the issues, who were the clients, how many people we coached, where were they from, all that good stuff to remind them about what I was doing. And I got some lovely referrals from that. And then recently I wrote a booklet, and none of this is planned, by the way. I have to say, none of this was kind of consciously, this year I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do this. It happened that early in the year when it was snowing and I had some cancellations because all the trains were down, I thought, God, I'm going to write a booklet about maternity coaching and what you can do when you're going through maternity. And it was the booklet I wish I'd had when I was going through that process. And I wrote it. And I got it professionally produced and made beautiful from a graphics perspective. And I sent that out. So I think continually telling your story as creatively as you possibly can, and buying help to do that. If you are not a creative person, and I think I'm only a little way on that spectrum, I'm not very far down that road yet. Get the help you need to keep telling the story as creatively as you can, and use opportunities. I have so many opportunities come my way to speak and to go and talk to organizations and speak to larger groups that that's another great way of marketing. And I hope that goes to answering Gary's question to some extent.
Well, Gary can respond on the chat panel if it doesn't, in terms of if there's something else. And I think just my reflections of knowing you, Helen, I constantly see you making contact and networking and really using your relationships like you've explained in terms of asking for referrals, meeting other people, and I think that's so important.
And I should say I never ever expected this to happen. So if you're sitting there thinking I haven't got a network, I wouldn't know where to begin. And that's exactly what I thought. But then I started to be brave and ask people, can you introduce me to someone in your organization? And I was amazed at what that yielded. So you might be sitting there thinking, God, there is nowhere to start. And I definitely felt like that, but it snowballed, is what I'd say. So to trust and be brave about asking for help.
Thank you. So in a minute, I just want to take you to the training aspect and your experiences of training as a coach, Helen. But so another question coming from Sarah, who's asking, what's been your greatest challenge that you've overcome in setting up your business?
Yes. Well, I can think of a few, but the one that springs to mind is I'm now at a stage where I'm wondering what's going to be most useful for Sarah, but the thing I want to say is I'm at a stage where there's lots of balls being juggled, and there isn't enough hours in the day to go and do the coaching that I know is there and what clients want me to do the marketing, to work with my associates, I'm about to rebrand actually and create a new name and a new image for my business. Where's the time to do that? So I'm at that critical mass stage where I'm sort of thinking this can't be all about me, because I can't do it all. But I think in the earlier days, setting up the business, one of the greatest challenges I had was it was frustrating at the beginning, because I'd go and have these conversations about this is what I do, this is a coaching, and then you might not hear anything for ages. And you think, my God, maybe no one wants this, and you can get disheartened. And then you have another conversation and something comes through, and that energizes you. And I think the greatest challenge when you're on your own is to keep going. Just keep going, trust that you're doing the right thing, seek advice, and trust that you're doing it, and don't be disheartened if nothing comes immediately. I think that was one of the greatest challenges actually, but now the challenge is different. I have a great problem which I never thought I'd have, and my challenge now is how can it not be just about me? Because otherwise I'm never going to pick my kids up from school. Yeah, that's how I feel.
Thank you. So I do just want to, we can see if there's any more questions in a short while, but there's a few other questions that are coming to mind that I think would be useful for people to hear. So, again, for people thinking about, training as a coach or are training at the moment, I mean, what would you say is really important? I suppose just again from your experiences, what would you like to share, or perhaps advice you would give them about when they're training?
Well, I was very lucky to, again, we get to that word luck. I was very lucky to be sent, the training was chosen for me by KPMG, that at the time were paying for the initial coach training. But what was fabulous about that time and that choice was that the training I underwent was led by coaches. I think that is a critical component. You have to be taught by active coaches. That's just fundamental. The other thing I'd say is make sure if you're entering into training, there's plenty of opportunity for you to practice in the moment, and it's not just sitting and learning. It's not an e-learning situation or a classroom situation where you're just sitting and learning about what coaching is. I think when you do coaching well, it looks really easy. It looks so simple to ask those questions, but actually when you practice it and you learn, you realize, God, this is actually quite harder than it looks. So make sure that you are entering into training that gives you the opportunity to practice over and over again and put these things, into real life situations. The other thing is the accreditation that the training gives you. Interestingly, to this point, only a couple of my clients have ever asked, are you accredited? But the market is changing. And because there's so many coaches out there, having a qualification that is accredited, and perhaps later down the line, but not too far later down the line, becoming individually accredited as a coach is a really important differentiator. So I would look out for that. Make sure the qualification is with an accredited body, because if you don't, you may have to go back and sort of fix that later down the line as the market becomes perhaps more regulated.
Thank you. And one of the questions I received earlier was about the reasons you chose a specific professional body. So I mean, I know you're accredited as individually with the EMCC, but I suppose, have you got any thoughts around the EMCC versus, I don't know, the ICF or, Yeah.
It's never come up as an issue for me, which one. And I actually find that question hard to answer. I do international work. So some of my work is in the States, some of it's in Europe. I'm not sure. I've never been conscious of the difference between the two. So I would suggest, if you have that query, go and do a bit more digging. But that's never been an issue. I think if you're with one of those two, you can't go too far wrong, is my thought.
Sure. Thank you. And in terms of just your transition from the other bit I was going to ask before I go to the group, being an internal coach and then becoming an external coach. Again, I've did a session with Claire Allen around being an internal coach, and she was talking specifically about what she saw as the differences. So again, just any thoughts around what you've noticed or the differences for you in terms of that transition?
Yes, yeah. There's definitely pluses and minuses of both. When you're an internal coach, what I loved about that is you are part of the system and you understand the shortcuts in the language, because you all understand if there's a big initiative or a big change in the organization and that's impacting the client. There's a shortcut in that language, which just makes it easier. I don't have that as an external coach often, unless I'm hearing a repeated issue being brought up. So that's helpful as an internal coach. You are part of the system. I think, as Claire may alluded to, it's also unhelpful in that you may also be suffering as a result of that initiative that other person is facing and trying to deal with. What I found really interesting becoming an external coach is how you are treated as the expert. So as an internal coach, you are a service to the business. I'm amazed at how, as an external, you are perceived as the expert in a way perhaps internal coaches are not, which is a shame, because I know that the internal coaches I worked with at KPMG are the best. I mean, these people are fabulous coaches. I was very lucky to learn from them and learn with them. I'm really interested. When I'm an external coach, very few people cancel on me. With the exception of the snow and the bad weather you couldn't get in, internally you're seen as more of, oh, well, we can just do it next week. As an external, it's taken more seriously. There's also a sort of trust element. I think in a professional service firm, the more senior you get, the more people question, do I want to be coached by someone who's internal? And even if you make all the assurances about trust and confidentiality, there's always that question of, actually, I want someone outside to coach with me. The other great thing about being an internal coach, particularly if you're part of a team, is just having someone next to you to say, God, what do you think about this? What should I do about this? I don't have that now. I have to actually pick up the phone and have that conversation. So I just turn to the person next to me. And that's another difference. There's a support network. There's a package around internal coaching that is wonderful and safe and a great environment to learn in. The other thing I'd say, and I think I got this wrong when I became an internal coach, is I had this vision that I'd become an internal coach and I'd spend all my day coaching. All my time would be spent with people working through their issues. Oh my God, it'd be fabulous. I think as an internal coach, I probably spent half my week doing other things, projects, bringing a coaching lens to other initiatives that the firm was doing. Talking to parts of the business about what they needed coaching for, that sort of thing. And then I think I made that mistake again when I became an external, because I thought, great, got rid of all that. I can go and do all the coaching I want to do. And of course, it isn't like that, because you spend half your week doing, talking to businesses about the kind of coaching that they want, going and doing sort of marketing events, networking events. And so it goes back to that illusion of, don't think, especially if you had coaching yourself and you thought it was such a fabulous experience, which is what happened to me, that you're going to go into coaching and spend all your day working the magic of a coach. It's just not like that in reality, whether you're internal or external, actually.
Thank you. There's another couple of questions have come through. I just seen one from Gary. So it's taken us a bit back to your business and those three core areas that you spoke about earlier in terms of the work that you're doing. And Gary's just saying, did you build a coaching product specifically to each of these areas? So for instance, if you're working with perhaps a mum who's coming back to work in terms of that transition? You know, is there a specific product that you offer around that?
Yes. So, you know, when I go to new organizations that want maternity coaching, for example, it's always tailored, it's always bespoke to that organization. But I know from experience, and I have a document that explains this, the sort of interventions you can make, what those interventions might be, what support we'd need from the business at each of those stages to make this work. So there is a product of sorts around that. I never go into any coaching situation with this is how this conversation is going to run, because I've tried that and it never works, because you never know what's going to show up in the room. But there is a framework for that. Same with returners. You know, we know from experience when might be the best time to start coaching, and what interventions. Is it group? Is it individuals? You know, what and when are the interventions that coaching can make to help that transition. With the third area, which is more about promotion, there are a few things I do within that become part of the product, you know, often around feedback and gathering feedback for that client, and helping them get a better sense of who they are as for example, a partner candidate. But that's less prescriptive, because it depends on what that particular client's bringing at that moment. But you know, to go to Gary's point, I think it is really, I think the buyers of coaching, less the coachee, but the buyers of coaching need to know that there is a sort of framework around this. You know, there is the process. This is a managed intervention of some sort. Otherwise, it can seem like I'm paying for, you know, the 6 sessions of coaching. What's going to happen? You know, what is it? I need more substance, and often that's what the buyers of coaching want. They want the substance behind it. So I think it's a great question, because I do try to bring some structure to it.
Great. And we've got another question come through from Sarah, just saying about, again, picking up on an earlier point you made about, you know, thinking from a marketplace in terms of, you know, the commercial perspective around, you know, what may be the latest trends, where may there be a niche in terms of what's emerging. So what are your thoughts around, you know, the way that perhaps you did it, or the way that you would advise someone else to approach that?
Yes. I am an introvert at heart, so talking to people at networking events is something I have to kind of psych myself up to do. But I spent a lot of time going to talk to people and asking, you know, sounding people out. I talked to really experienced coaches. You know, what do you see? I did that a lot, actually. There's 2 or 3 coaches that come to mind now where I tested some thoughts on them, and I got their view of, you know, what does the market want. And that was gold dust. Going to talk to those really established coaches were brilliant. Just talking to my network, going and talking to heads of talent. You know, the whole returners piece really came about because I was doing a piece of work in KPMG on returners, but then I happened to notice there was an organization I work closely with called the Return Hub. There was a piece about them in the newspaper, and I went and had a conversation with them. You know, what are you seeing? Here's what I do. How can we work better together? And I astound myself sometimes, but I was quite brave to just go and say, look, can I go and have this conversation? You know, can I find this out from you? And I think you have to go and ask, because I could sit and look on the internet all day about the trends. Go and ask the people out there who are buying and who are already coaches, because I think I learned most from those conversations.
Great, thank you. And I mean, obviously there's a lot of research papers as well. I just throw that in as well for Sarah. You know, I don't know, the Riddler reports, you know, CIPD. There's various studies that you can look at in terms of really identifying trends that are coming up from an organisational perspective, not from the coaching experts. Really, what the buyers are saying in terms of their agenda. So Helen, you know, as coaches, we're all magpies, and we all like to sort of think about what someone else is doing and how we can apply that. So I suppose the other question I have, and again, please feel free to the participants, you know, please add any other questions you'd like me to ask. But what are some of the core models that you're using in your work currently? And again, it just might be interesting for the coaches listening to hear that.
Yeah, sure. Um, if I take a step back and think about the topics that tend to come up for my clients, and then what I use with them. So I hear a lot about, well, actually, interestingly, the thing that springs to mind is I'm often sent partner candidates who have been told you are partner material, and the issue is not that the door is not open for women to go and become partners in organizations. It's often the issue that they don't want to step through the door. So some of the work is around, what do you really want? How can you step into your authority and be the partner you want to be, that would work for you and your life and your family? And for that, I do a lot of work around identity and owning who are you as a coach. If I saw as a partner, if I saw you operating as a partner and you were fabulous as a partner, what would I see you do? So it's helping people visualize that. So I do quite a lot of work of, think about the stepping stones, papers on the floor, trying to get them to think about, what environment would you be if you're operating at your best? What would I hear you say? What would be the purpose of what you're doing? So I do quite a lot of that. The other thing I hear, endlessly, and we're about to launch a workshop on this with a colleague of mine, is imposter syndrome. That's not just a female thing. That's often in high performing organizations, and that is crippling. That is crippling for lots of the clients that I work with. So there I'm trying to seek evidence. So I work up with feedback. So let's find out what is the real data here that tells us how good you are at your job and how you think you are perceived. I do a lot of parent, adult, child model. Where are you? Are you what kind of role are you adopting in this particular scenario? And similar to that, I love working with emotions. And interestingly, whilst I'm quite a pragmatist, that's my background. I'm quite solutions oriented. I'm always keen to kind of get to the answer. I'm also really interested in emotions and what underpins the behavior and the limiting beliefs that I'm seeing. So one of the things I often do with my clients is the think, feel, do model. What are you thinking in an environment? What are you feeling? And then what happens? Okay, so what happens if we change the thought? What emotions does that give rise to? What do you do in the moment? Thinking, what else do I use? I mean, the kind of creative techniques we talked about, so bringing in imagery. I love, I think about a time there was a lawyer I was working with, we're halfway through the coaching, and I took a chance at that time. It would feel less of a sort of risk at this time, but at that time I asked her, before we did anything in the coaching session, I just said, I'd like you to draw 3 pictures. Just before we talk about anything, talk 3 pictures. We're halfway through. Draw me 3 pictures. One around where you were before coaching started, one around where you are now, and the third around where you want to be. And it was a lovely way to open the dialogue about where are we really, and where do you want to get to? So using imagery, using values. I had values cards. I sometimes bring those out. And I know, I'm working on more embodied systemic ways of getting to the bottom of, why do you feel like an imposter? What's really going on here? What's stopping and blocking your confidence in this moment? But I still feel to this day, I don't think it'll ever go, that when I go into a coaching setting, I should have a number of tools in my kit bag, and I know which tools I'm going to use. And I have spent a lot of time, wasted time, frankly, planning for a session where I think, oh yeah, okay, maybe I think we're in this place, we'll use this thing. And actually it never works out like that. And I remember when I was training as a coach practitioner, that it was you, Damien, that said to me, you start off as a coach with this big bag of tools and sort of bring them into every meeting, and the bag is almost the tools are the things you use before the coach shows up. So whilst I have these tools, I'm trying to hold them very lightly, because sometimes the best coaching is just the conversation that you might have.
Thank you. Thank you. So before, I've got one more question for you, Helen, but I'm just going to see if there are any other questions just coming from the group, either around Helen's experience of developing as a coach or developing her business. Just see if there's anything else that comes through. But I suppose for me, just any other advice that you have for coaches out there, for people that are thinking of training as coaches. I mean, what's the advice that you would really give them?
Yeah, so as I think about the things I'm working on myself as a coach, so there's the kind of business side, but then my own practice. It seems so it's so drummed into you as a coach, but I think even now, having spoke to really long-standing coaches, the importance of contracting with your client. I mean, all roads lead back to contracting, it seems, and it's something I've got better at, but I still have more work to do in. So being really firm, both with the buyers of the coaching, but really crucially with the coachee on the contract, because when you don't have that solid foundation, that safety net to go back to, that's when you get into warmer water. So being very conscious of the contracts you're entering into is one thing. I think another thing that I'm learning, continue to learn, and hope that others would kind of be noticing this, is remembering your role in the system. There's a contract there, but remembering your role and bringing some relatively tough love to the conversations you might be having to ensure you are always objective. You always remember, where am I in this system? What is my role in this system? Who am I in relation to whoever's paying for the coaching and the coachee and any of the stakeholders, and being able to be objective so that you can still have that challenge. You're not colluding. You're trying to be as supportive but as objective as you can be. And those are two things I'm still working on, which I imagine if I spoke to lots of my peers who are in similar place in their journey as a coach, would share with me. And if you can get those things right at the start of your coaching journey, that will set you in such fabulous stead going forward.
Thank you, Helen. I really appreciate you being so honest, just in terms of both your business and your journey and transition out of KPMG as well. So I suppose anything you want to say to the group, just to at the end of the webinar, really.
Yeah, I just want to say I've never looked back on becoming a coach. I knew it was for me, and I'm so thankful that the opportunity came when it did for me to go and experiment to become a coach, and then all the things that have happened since then for me to get to where I am. So it's a fabulous profession to be in. It is I just find it really energizing. It's a privilege. It's an absolute privilege to be a coach and work with people in the way that we do. If you're setting up as a business, that is a different skill set, and I would encourage anyone that's on this call thinking about setting up in a business to do a lot of planning. I'm risk averse, so I did loads of planning. I mean, it took me months and years to get the guts to make the leap. Do your homework and talk to people. I'm very thankful for everyone that's ever offered me their thoughts on this. So I would go and read, listen, speak, talk to people, and do your homework before you go and do it. But if you get there, and I'm sure lots of people in this conversation will, it's a fabulous place to be.
Thank you. So really just to end, thanks for dialing in, the guys who've joined us live. Just to say that the next webinar is taking place on the 29th of June at 2 o'clock, and this will be all around developing your presence. So a dear colleague of mine, Janie Van Hall, will be joining. She specializes in working with chief execs and exec members around the whole aspects of presence, but also works with coaches and facilitators as well. So really hope you can join us for that dialogue as well. And yeah, look forward to seeing you again. So yeah, thanks very much. And really hope you've taken some insights from this session. Because, you know, again, thank you, Helen, for what you've shared.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure.